Okay, so thank you for coming back to us for our little roundtable. We had hoped to do this at the end of workshop 2, but we had so many fantastic, exciting conversations on the day that we had to delay that. So we're so grateful that, especially now that we're all not in the same time zone, we've managed to pull everybody back together for this roundtable. So this is just going to be about 30 minutes of general reflection upon the conversations that we had during the second workshop, and pulling out some of those key questions that recurred throughout that day. So to kick us off, I'm just going to ask each of our keynote speakers to reintroduce themselves and to just say a little bit about their approaches to translating making knowledge. So I think maybe if we go in the order that people spoke on the day. So I think, Bernadette, that means starting with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I hope this is working now. Hi, I'm Bernadette Banner. I am a dress historian turned YouTuber. So, YouTube, social media is now my full-time job, but I do that within the context of making content around the history of dress.
Next. Sorry, I think we froze for a second, but we're back now.
I'm Samantha Bullitt, and I am the tailor for the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation in Williamsburg, Virginia. And my work really deals with translating making knowledge for diverse museum audiences, whether that's school children or visitors of any age, and finding ways to give them hands-on experiences to better translate that kind of tactile knowledge that we're able to generate through actually doing things, to put that into their hands, to give them a sense of our process and also the things that we discover by actually being able to put their hands on the history.
Hi, I'm Nina.
Sorry, I'm Nina Mikhaila. Originally, well, I am an historical costumier, but then branched out into also becoming a dress historian, researcher and writer of books on reconstructing dress from the 16th century, which began with the publication of The Tudor Tailor in 2006, which I published with Jane Malcolm Davis, my business partner. So initially my business was really about reconstructing dress usually for museums and heritage sites, with a view to translating the making knowledge to an audience of either school children or to visitors at those sites. And then since the publication of The Tudor Tailor and other books, the audience has been much more to include individuals, often who are making their own reconstructions of dress and are particularly interested in reaching a high level of historical accuracy. And of course, all of it spills over very much into the social history of dress, which is a bit I really love.
That's fantastic. Thank you, everybody. So the first question that Sarah and I wanted to put to you all was, how can the Academy better work with those of you working in those different kinds of spaces, be they living history, be they public history, be they social media, to better capture and translate making knowledge? And I think we're particularly interested here in the importance of collaboration. So maybe you can reflect on your experiences of collaboration and any ways that you think that we can work better to collaborate between these different worlds. Anyone can start.
Well, I'm happy to begin because I certainly looked at that a lot in my presentation and really wanted to stress the importance of collaboration, not only between academics and makers, but also certainly from my point of view, the different makers in my own field, that recognizing that everybody has their strengths and I wouldn't like to call them weaknesses, but they're not so strong points, and that it's really important to recognize what those are and to work with your strengths, and then reach out to other people to invite them to bring their strengths. And that's very much how it worked in the past with making dress, that everything was made by experts within a very narrow field. And today we ask a lot of ourselves to try and reconstruct an entire outfit, or sometimes even an entire garment, without reaching out to all these specialists who have all had their own, usually very long training in the form of a 7-year apprenticeship. So it's absolutely crucial. It was crucial then, and it still is crucial now. And I think we do need to be reminded of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point of sort of recognizing different strengths that we all have, and that through collaboration, we can really kind of, be able to answer a lot of the questions that we do have for each other. I'm thinking about how at my site we do primarily recreation, whether that's through living history, and actually making things and wearing the clothes and doing the things. And then a few miles down the road, we have the actual archaeological site that we recreate, where there is ongoing archaeology every single day. They're discovering new things. And so it's only relatively recently that we've developed a more collaborative research where the things that are coming out of the ground, they're telling us about. And then, we're able to tell them, well, here's how we have used that item that, that you've just pulled out of the ground. And so there's things that, both sides of that relationship, we're experts in, or we have focused our own fields of study on. But by bringing those two together, we're able to have a much more nuanced, a much deeper understanding of the history that we're both, trying to understand. So yeah, I think being open to collaboration is really kind of the first step. And then being able to see the fruits of that kind of relationship is really rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the communication and the public distribution of our knowledge and research, there's, I think, fewer better places these days to go for that than social media, which can be a blessing and a curse in many ways. But on the one hand, we have these algorithms that have been built for precisely this method of public distribution, to access precisely the people who might potentially have an interest, who might not necessarily know they have an interest in dress history. And one thing I've discovered in sort of stumbling into this as a career is that it's a whole field of study in and of itself. It's a whole job in and of itself, not just the social media and the research and the sort of marketing end of that, but also the if you're working in video like I am, then the whole film production aspect of it is a whole job department in and of itself as well. And one thing that I know myself, as well as a couple of other colleagues who I've spoken to over the years, have discovered, is that there's not necessarily time to keep up with all the different aspects of the distribution, the filming if you're doing filming, writing if you're blogging, photography if you're doing Instagram or whatever it is, as well as on my end, because I spend so much time on the video production and distribution, I don't necessarily have time to do as many research projects as as perhaps some of my more dress history focused colleagues do. And so the collaboration of being able to bring my experience in distribution and production, video production, to my colleagues who are doing really interesting work and who I want to learn from, and I want to hear what they're up to, as well as I would like, to give them the platform to share with audiences who are interested in it, I think is a really great form of collaboration.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to sort of why we wanted to put together this network, right? Because there's so much amazing work being done in so many different areas, and sometimes we can get a bit siphoned off from each other. So it's really good to actually come together and to think through these sorts of questions. And I mean, another question we had, which relates to what we've just been discussing, is the role of new modes of media. So obviously video in particular, Bernadette, you've just spoken about in the translation of the tacit. And also I think adding to that, sort of the role of technology in sort of bridging these divides between different specializations, especially when you're maybe distributed globally. So yeah, any sort of thoughts that you might have, I know you probably have quite a lot, Bernadette, on the role of new modes of media in this sort of translation of the tacit, which is what which the tacit being something that usually you have to be there in person, I guess, and learning traditionally. Anyway.
Yeah, well, one of the downsides, I think, to digital media is that lack of the ability to get your hands on things and to see things in person and to examine things up close. That is a problem that, many of my colleagues have raised, and it's a very valid, curiosity. And I'm not sure that we fully solved that, but I think at least where I've sort of found comfort in my work is in being the gateway drug to dress history, in sort of harnessing the YouTube algorithm to get mass appeal content out and sort of funnel people down from, okay, here's a review of a really popular historical TV show that, a lot of people are interested in, and funnel them down into, okay, but what did these clothes actually look like and how were they made? And start to ask those more nuanced questions to get them thinking more academically, and then send them off to the academics who are publishing and who are, holding conferences and writing articles and doing really great in-depth niche work. But those people might not necessarily have known where to look or what to look for, or that they were necessarily interested in that stuff. So I've found that my sort of role within this has been comfortably to just introduce to a wide audience of people, and then leave the more tacit, the more in-person and in-depth and niche study to the people who can get people into the room and teach with objects in the room, and that really important education that doesn't have the ability to be distributed widely, because in person, in the room classes don't necessarily have the benefit of being distributed in an algorithm for the whole world to see.
Yeah, I think I would add that the fact that so much more is online in its various forms can only be helpful, really, because the bottom line, very sadly, is that there is nothing to replace looking at a real thing with a real person. But a lot can be done to bridge that enormous gap. And one of the problems with, as you just said, Bernadette, is knowing what it is that you want to see and knowing how to find it. That in the past has been incredibly difficult and inaccessible. And the fact that so many actual makers and academics and historians that cover, that bridge the two gaps are actually doing things online means that there are conversations being had and there are dots being joined in a way that it was almost impossible to do in really very recent history. And I think that's brilliant, that walls are coming down and you can actually find things out in what is mainly a very open and friendly community now, in a way that it wasn't.
Yeah, I think just the fact that you can find nearly anything that you might be interested in available. Specifically, I'm thinking of YouTube, and it has that mass reach. You're able to connect with people that you may never have connected with before, and discover things that you might never have discovered before. And Bernadette said a gateway, and I think it really is. I know the number of comments that I've gotten of, I watched this video and then I tried it for myself. And I think that's certainly the hope, is to encourage people to create that tacit experience for themselves, to say, this is the research I did, these are the steps that I took. And, my hope is that people don't take what I say as the end all be all, but that they continue the exploration and experimentation that is so necessary in our work, that you really do have to put your hands on it. And so yeah, just the fact that we can share that so much more easily now is really wonderful.
And I guess in a way, adding to that, I mean, the medium of video isn't perfect, but in a way, as you're saying, I can read, for example, how to do a stitch or how to put something together, but then, and I'm sort of like, oh, I think I understand. But then if I watch a video of someone doing it, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. Which I guess, observation is that an important part of the tacit. So in a way, we can't fully recreate that experience, but I guess we can sort of slightly get there.
Yeah, and from the point of view of kind of academic ways of translating this knowledge as well, video is something that I've done both from a YouTube perspective, but also from an alternative way of translating that knowledge into a published format. So my forthcoming book with Cambridge University Press, not to self-promote, has an online platform that goes along with it, with videos of the making process. So I think it's really important that academia is beginning to acknowledge the power of video in taking that tacit knowledge, that information that we are trying to get back at in the past, and not just go, oh, and then we need to perpetuate the problem by turning this into text again. It's actually recognizing there are other ways of doing it. And also with a higher education in the UK hat on, this is also so important for the way that we're processing impact for REF, which is the Research Excellence Framework, for those unfamiliar, which is one of the key ways that researchers at universities in the UK actually get money from the government to support our ongoing research. And one key strand of this is proving impact. And exactly those points about, oh, I took this and I tried it and I had a go myself and it's changed somebody else's practice. And even just the numbers that we can reach through a platform like YouTube are really, really powerful in those UK higher education REF terms, which I'm aware is only of interest to the small niche of people that are working in academia in the UK, but is nonetheless.
It's the same in Australia too, don't worry. Impact and engagement has taken over everywhere, which is great.
Is no bad thing actually, because it really is supporting the kinds of conversations that we're trying to have between people that are working in higher education institutions and everybody else that's doing incredible research that doesn't have that institutional support necessarily, but is finding different ways of going about it, and that's really exciting. But I think that this also leads us nicely onto the next question. So one of the things that all of you touched on there was actually that video and social media is great, but it can't necessarily replace the actual hands-on. So our next question was essentially, well, how important is the hands-on? Does that continue to be really significant, for example, in allowing visitors in museums to touch things? And in terms of people actually having a go themselves, what is the continued importance of that physical haptic interaction with the things?
Yeah, I think especially at my institution, we have always stressed the hands-on aspect of being able to translate and share historical knowledge, which of course made things a little bit difficult in 2020 when we could not touch anything at that point. So we were kind of a little strapped to try to rethink about how we were going to share things without putting things into people's hands, because that really always has been a core piece of how we educate, because having that tacit experience, there's just there, as we've said, there really isn't anything quite like that, to be able to work things out for yourself and to have that shared physical experience with you know, the interpreter that you're speaking to, and then also people of the past, it really creates that kind of personal connection that people can have with historical people by experiencing physically the same or similar things. And so that has really informed the way that I approach, you know, educating or communicating these experiences with other people, is that for me, being able to put something in someone's hands is just, there's just nothing else like it. And so I always try to advocate for, you know, ways to do that in ways that are meaningful. And it was actually kind of funny because after our workshop, I went to the Mary Rose Museum the next day, and they had a dress-up box. And I know dress-up boxes came up quite a bit throughout the day. And it was a bit sad because it was the version of a dress-up box that I don't think contributes to learning in a hands-on way, where they literally were just like fancy dress, you know, things. And so it really drove home for me the idea that it still has to be hands-on, that is deeply rooted in research. And so I think that's where that kind of collaboration piece between academia and makers comes in as well, because hands-on for hands-on's sake does not help anybody. And so, you know, kind of making that distinction and really questioning why you're doing something is also important with the hands-on piece, especially in a museum setting.
Lots of emphatic nods there. or Bendette want to come in on anything further on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I find it a really interesting question because half of my job being a producer of digital media relies solely on the digital and the non-tangible, versus the content itself being about material object study is a very tangible. I mean, the whole nature of material culture study is the material, the physical thing of it. So it is an interesting sort of conundrum of how to bring this material culture study into the digital realm. And I think a really interesting aspect of the internet in particular as a method of distribution, as opposed to, you know, like television or documentary, is that the former, the latter is much more presentational. It's a lot more professional. The internet has sort of broken down a lot of those barriers of this is a production, this was done by a whole team of people, but a lot of, especially social media based online content like YouTube, at least starts off as, you know, one person with a camera in their living room. Here's what I'm doing, come along with me on this journey. And that, I think, helps to bring a viewer in on a much more personal level and think, oh, you know, this isn't produced completely by professionals. This is someone who's studying something, who has a question that they're maybe pursuing. They're trying out this new technique for themselves. They're making mistakes. I know myself and a lot of my fellow YouTube creators make a point to show a lot of the mistakes that we make and the things that we learn from those mistakes. And I think that helps to bring people in to the content on a more personal level and say, oh, actually, you know, I'm not a professional. I'm not, you know, I'm not an expert at this, but maybe I can try this too. And I think that might be if not having the ability to physically put things in people's hands and say, here's what this fabric feels like, you know, here's what this object feels like from 300 years ago, but to at least invite people into this world and make people feel like they're part of it, so that when they go to a fabric store, they've at least heard the word, you know, silk charmeuse before, and they think, oh, I've seen this person use that with this, and it had this sort of negative effect, or it was this maybe not so great, easy to work with these sort of techniques. And they have a little bit of, I don't want to say like personal experience, but to them it feels like parasocial personal experience in a way, just inspiring people to want to get into it a bit more.
Yeah, I think it gives you the ability as the viewer and the participant in an online event to actually look at the things that are accessible to you with new eyes, doesn't it? If you then go to a museum and see a portrait or an artifact, you'll see it with a new appreciation, which, you know, what you're saying, and with almost having the tools of language and a bit more understanding to actually absorb the information and experience it in a different way. And although we can't literally put the things that are on our side of the screen into people's hands, we enable them to do things with their hands within their own realms and actually understand it better. So it's still incredibly valuable, I think.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask as well, I mean, I think this sort of relates to what we're talking about, but also, so Michelle, who isn't with us today, but this was sort of a question, I guess, more aimed for Michelle and Ninya, but also, I guess, Bernadette to an extent, because you all technically, I guess, run businesses in this space. And I'm wondering how that affects the way that you might, think about translating, making knowledge, particularly obviously Ninya, you have a very popular book series, which sort of teaches people how to make garments and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm wondering like what your thoughts are on, you're not just a practitioner, but you own a business in this space. And so how that sort of influences the way that you navigate the space.
Well, I suppose I set out my stall from the beginning to be making very particular kinds of reconstructions. When I left the London College of Fashion, and that was back in 1994, aged 19, I didn't, I couldn't have even attempted to go and look for a job doing what I do. It didn't exist as a job of employment. So I made myself this little niche category where I only wanted to take on projects where the desired outcome was for a high standard of historical accuracy and backed up with research and all of that. So I'm not the kind of business who, luckily, I never was the kind of business that was having to say, okay, huge compromises because I need the work. I managed to get in there at just the right time when there was an opening for what I was doing. And there was a lot of, it was really when it was all beginning, the whole dressed interpreters at heritage sites and using reconstructions for educational programs. I was very lucky in that way. And then publishing the books enabled a much wider audience to be able to follow that similar path, and that's what we continue to do. I mean, actually, Michelle's presentation on the day was one of the ones that really, I mean, everything left something important from that day. There was so much to take on, but her, when she talked about, the conversation that she'd had with her project with the museum of why is what we do important and what does it matter in the big scheme of things, that's been kind of going round in my mind a lot since the day, and especially because of everything that's happened in the world since then. It's had me asking that question a lot, and actually happily feeling much more reassured about why it's important and the importance of connecting, and what we talked about a lot on the day, of not only connecting with people in the past through learning through what we're actually doing, but making all of these connections now with people that live now, and how we're expressing our humanity and sharing that experience with other people, and we're all doing that in our different realms and confinements, which is the bottom line important thing.
Very similar to Ninya, I also had no idea that this was a job possibility before I got into it. And it just sort of happened completely by accident, and then realized, okay, I have to put together something to make this pay some bills so that I can keep doing it. And I find that I do have, working in YouTube as a profession is a lot different from doing YouTube sort of for fun as I was doing in the beginning. In the beginning, I was able to take on whatever projects I wanted, to talk about whatever I wanted. Now I do find that I have to think about, okay, but what are people going to watch? How am I going to frame this so that I can communicate this in a concise 60-character title that people will click on so that they actually receive the information? Otherwise, if you can't do that, there's no point, because people aren't going to be able to find the information. And then, of course, balancing out, okay, I know this is going to be a very niche topic, but I feel like it's very important for people to eventually listen to. This is, someone's work who's been doing some really interesting work, and I'd love for my audience to be able to hear what they're going to say. I know it's not going to hit like the mass algorithm, but how do I balance that out? How do I, pair that, sort of bookend that with some really popular mass appeal videos, so that those videos generate the funds that I need to pay this person who's presenting really great information, who deserves to be paid for that information. So there is a lot more of that sort of business-minded thought that goes into my business running now, which is not something I ever would have conceived of having to do when I first began this. But it's been a really interesting a discovery of doing this, and I hope, I don't feel like we ever really feel fully 100% confident that we're doing it right, but we try things, we make mistakes, we experiment, and hopefully in the end we end up sticking to what initially started us down this path, which is wanting to share dress history information in a way that is engaging and informative and helpful to the audience, while also bringing in enough money to actually pay the bills and pay the people fairly who are doing the research and the work to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and that point about actually about being fairly paid for your work is really significant in this field, because I think it's something that a lot of people do for love, and because we're really enthusiastic about it, but actually there are lots of ways in which it is commercially viable, because there is an audience out there that cares about it, and when people care about things, they'll invest in them in some way. So I think there's lots of important economic and commercial messages that can be taken away from this, as well as the kind of more culturally grounded and historically important things that we're interested in. So I think that I will just ask us all to round this all off by asking each of you to just reflect on your one key takeaway, your thing that you'd like to recommend or see happen in the next 5 or 10 years of this field developing. What is the thing that you would love to see happen, that you think should happen, that you think is important to happen, and what we should be focusing on as we move forward with the network and its legacy? Whoever would like to go first.
Well, I found it a very powerful thing on the day to have so many people with so much knowledge in one place having conversations, that's the thing really. Just keep the conversations going with representatives from all those different parts of our world, all the different threads coming together, because that's when the magic happens. And that in terms of publishing as well, like you were saying, Serena, that not confining everything to text, but always looking for new ways to expand the knowledge database and keep the conversations going.
I think what struck me in both preparing for my talk, and because for me it was a lot of reflection on kind of my career, and even before that, what led me to it, and just the fact that, as Nina said, all of us were in one room, and to think that like 10 years ago something like that might not have existed. What Serena and Sarah have created would not necessarily have existed 10 years ago, or even and for me, that makes me very excited and hopeful for the future, the continued future of dress history as a field of study, because there were a lot of times early on in my career where it felt like we were still battling for some kind of sense of legitimacy as a field. And not that that's all solved now or anything, but I think as people really see even just the mass appeal of the field, that there is something incredibly valuable about it as it connects to social history and that. So I think that was really my biggest takeaway, was this sense of hope and excitement for the field, and that, you know, especially social media has been able to really democratize it and get more people, you know, as Bernadette likes to say, like people who didn't even know that they had an interest in this. And so I think the more people that are able to be reached, it will only, you know, add richness to the perspectives that we have in this field of study.
Yeah, I feel like I see so much potential still in every aspect of this field, from people who are looking on, from my audience members who are watching and constantly wanting more and more information, they have questions on topics that I can't answer, that I know colleagues have been doing fantastic research into, who I know would have the answers to these things, as well as in the amount of money that dress historians are able to make. I feel like there's so much potential in these realms of distributing information to all the people who want to see it, to all the people who have all sorts of questions on all sorts of topics, and then being able to pay people fairly for the information and for the research that they're doing. I feel like there are enough people, and there are enough, I mean, if you want to go the advertising route within social media, there's enough sort of public interest to be able to fund people's research, and it's just a matter of putting people together. So that's what I would like to see happen in future.
That's really wonderful. So thank you, everybody. That is the end of Sarah and my questions. Thank you so much again for both your fantastic presentations on the day and for agreeing to do this roundtable after the fact, and just your general contributions to this field. So thank you very much. And as per your suggestions, we will continue to be trying to bring people together. We obviously have the call for papers for our third workshop out at the moment. And then we'll also have our Festival of Remaking at DMU in September 2024. So we really hope to see all of you as part of that conversation as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.